Germany started the biggest mechanized war in history, riding a tank they never actually intended to use in combat. The Panzer II was supposed to be a placeholder, a training wheel tank meant to fill seats until the real stuff showed up. It stayed for the entire war. So today we're covering every notable German vehicle from World War II, starting with the little tank that could Panzer II. Here's the thing about the Panzer II. It was designed the way you'd buy a cheap car to get you through the summer. Temporary, disposable. Germany needed something to fill out its Panzer divisions, while the Panzer III and IV were still being developed. So they threw together a light tank with a 20mm autocannon and called it a day. About 1,856 of these rolled off the production line. The main gun could cycle around 280 rounds per minute, which sounds impressive until you remember the 10-round magazine means you're reloading constantly. But the real story isn't the tank itself, it's the chassis. Long after the tank was obsolete, that chassis kept showing up under self-propelled guns like the Weisby and tank destroyers like the Marder II. The Panzer II was the automotive equivalent of a temporary employee who's still at the company 15 years later, except now they run payroll. But if you think a stopgap light tank is a rough way to start a war, wait until you meet the tank that was supposed to replace it, Panzer III. The Panzer III was supposed to be the star of the show. Heinz Guderian himself laid out the specs. A medium tank with a good gun, decent armor, the backbone of every Panzer division. And for about 2 years, it actually was. Then it met Soviet armor. The original 3.7cm gun couldn't penetrate a T-34 unless you were practically kissing it. They upgraded to the 5cm KWK-38. Still not enough. Stretched the barrel with the KWK-39. Better, but by that point you're performing surgery on a patient who needs a transplant. Around 5,774 were built, plus thousands more chassis converted into assault guns like the Stu G3. That's a staggering commitment to a platform already being humiliated on the Eastern Front. Here's the genuinely tragic part. By 1942, the Panzer IIIN variant ditched anti-tank duty entirely and mounted a short 7.5cm gun for infantry support. Meanwhile, the Panzer IV took over anti-tank work with a long-barreled 7.5. The two tanks literally swapped jobs mid-war, which is, not ideal, but at least the Panzer III got to exist in large numbers. The next tank on our list had the opposite problem entirely. Everyone talks about the Tiger, everyone loves the Panther, but the tank that actually fought the war from the very first day to the very last was this one, the Panzer IV. Around 8,500 produced, served on literally every front Germany touched, and it doesn't even get a cool nickname. It started life as an infantry support tank with a short-barreled 7.5cm gun, basically designed to lob high-explosive shells at bunkers and troops. Not exactly a tank killer, but then Germany ran into Soviet armor, and suddenly, lobbing shells at buildings wasn't going to cut it, so they strapped on the long-barreled 7.5cm KWK-40, and just like that, the support tank became a genuine threat to enemy armor. The Panzer IV is the only German tank that stayed in continuous production from 1939 to 1945. Poland, France, North Africa, the Eastern Front, the final defense of Berlin. All of it. Not because it was the best tank on the field, but because it was reliable, adaptable, and you could actually build enough of them to matter, which is, kind of important when you're fighting a war. But if the Panzer IV was the backbone of the German tank force, the next vehicle was the Fist. The Panther exists because Germany saw the T-34 and had a collective panic attack. Soviet tanks showed up with sloped armor and wide tracks that handled mud like pavement, and German engineers basically said, we need one of those. But German. On paper, it was a masterpiece. A high-velocity 7.5cm gun that could punch through virtually any Allied tank at range, beautifully angled armor, and around 6,000 produced between 1943 and 1945. When everything was functioning correctly, this was arguably the best medium tank on the battlefield. But when everything was functioning correctly is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting in that sentence. The Panther debuted at Kursk in July 1943. Brand new wonder weapon, ready to turn the tide. Instead, Panthers broke down before reaching the front. Transmissions failed, engines overheated, and caught fire. Some units reported the majority of their Panthers out of action from mechanical failures alone. Not enemy fire, just physics and poor quality control doing what the Soviets couldn't. Germany rushed the Panther into production because they desperately needed it, then acted surprised when a rush tank performed like a rush tank, which is, not ideal. So the Panther became a tragic contradiction. A brilliant design trapped inside a body that refused to cooperate. When it worked, crews loved it. When it didn't, it was a 45-ton paperweight sitting in a field while its crew waited for a recovery vehicle that was probably also broken down. But if you think the Panther had an identity crisis, wait until you meet its older brother. This is the one. Tiger 1 the most famous tank of World War II, and probably the most famous tank ever built. The Tiger I has more name recognition than some entire countries, and it earned that reputation. The 8.8-centimeter main gun was derived from the Flak 88 anti-aircraft cannon, already one of the most feared weapons of the war. Slap that on a 57-ton chassis with 100 millimeters of frontal armor, and you've got a machine most Allied guns literally could not penetrate its standard ranges. But here's the thing, only about 1,347 Tigers were ever produced total. The Allies pumped out tens of thousands of Shermans in the same time frame, and the Tiger was a logistical nightmare. It drank fuel like it was going out of style, was too heavy for most bridges, and required specialized rail cars just to reach the front. So you've got this incredible weapon that spends half its life broken down or waiting for a train. The wildest part is the psychological impact. Allied troops develop what historians call Tiger fear, reporting Tiger encounters even when fighting completely different vehicles. A Panzer IV rolls up and suddenly every radio in the sector is screaming about Tigers. The myth became bigger than the machine, which is, not ideal for accurate battlefield intelligence. But if the Tiger I had logistics problems, wait until you meet its bigger, heavier, even more impractical successor, Tiger II. The Tiger II is what happens when you look at an already overweight tank and say, yeah, but what if we made it fatter? Also called the King Tiger, this thing weighed nearly 70 tons, making it the heaviest production tank to see combat in the entire war. It carried the long-barreled 8.8-centimeter KWK-43, a gun that could penetrate any Allied tank at virtually any combat range. On paper, the ultimate predator. Here's the thing, reality could stop it. Only 492 were ever built. The Allies were pumping out Shermans like newspapers. Germany managed 492 King Tigers across the entire war. Production was slow, resource-intensive, and constantly getting interrupted by Allied bombers flattening the factories, which is, not ideal when you're trying to win a war of attrition. But the real comedy is the drivetrain. Nearly 70 tons sitting on an engine and transmission already struggling in the Panther, a vehicle 25 tons lighter. The Maybach HL230 was chronically overstressed, breaking down with alarming regularity. Imagine strapping a sedan engine into a dump truck and acting surprised when it catches fire on the highway. It was too heavy for most bridges, too thirsty for a fuel-starved army, and too fragile to reliably reach the battlefield. A tank that can kill anything it sees doesn't matter much if it's sitting in a field with a blown transmission, but if you think an over-engineered tank is peak German ambition, wait until we talk about what they strapped an 8.8 to next, Stug 3. This is the most important German armored vehicle of World War II, and nobody's favorite. No turret, no cool factor, no Hollywood appearances, just a flat, squat box on tracks that quietly racked up more kills than anything else Germany ever fielded. The Stug 3 was built on the Panzer III chassis, making it cheaper and faster to produce than a proper tank. Without a turret, the whole thing sat lower to the ground, making it absurdly difficult to spot and even harder to hit. Germany produced around 11,300 of them across all variants. Not the Panzer IV, not the Tiger, the boring one. Originally designed for infantry support, it rolled alongside ground troops blasting fortified positions with a short-barreled 75mm gun. But as the war dragged on, and Germany needed tank killers, the Stu G3 got a longer, nastier gun and a new job description. German wartime estimates credited Stug units with roughly 20,000 Allied tank kills by war's end. That's a German wartime claim, so take it with a grain of salt the size of a Volkswagen. But even if you cut that number in half, it still outperforms every other German AFV by a massive margin. The Tiger gets all the documentaries, the Stug 3 actually won engagements. But if you think a turretless box is the weirdest design choice Germany made, wait until you see what they did with the Panther chassis. Take the Panther chassis, rip the turret off, and bolt an 8.8-centimeter Paquet 43 to the front. That's the same gun the Tiger II carried, except now it's sitting on something 10 tons lighter that can actually keep up with a column. The Jagdpanther is widely considered one of the best tank destroyers of the entire war, and honestly, it's hard to argue. The front hull featured 80mm of sloped armor, giving it protection that punched well above its weight class. The gun could delete practically anything the Allies fielded at ranges most crews couldn't even see clearly. Low profile, devastating firepower, genuine mobility. On paper, this thing was perfect. Here's the thing, only about 415 were ever built, and because it sat on the Panther chassis, it inherited every reliability problem the Panther had. Final drives failing, transmissions giving up, chronic parts shortages, meaning a broken Jagdpanther stayed broken. So you had arguably the finest tank destroyer of the war, and Germany could barely keep a handful running at any given time. It's the ultimate what-if vehicle. What if they'd prioritized this over the Tiger II? What if production started earlier? But none of that happened. happened. So instead of a war-winning weapon, you got 415 incredible machines spread across a collapsing front, breaking down faster than they could be replaced, which is, not ideal. But if the Jagdpanther makes you wonder what Germany could have achieved with better priorities, wait until you see what they built when they stopped caring about priorities entirely. SDKFZ 251. You've seen this vehicle 1,000 times and never once thought about it. Every World War II movie, every documentary, every black and white photo of German troops rolling through some unfortunate European town, there's a half-track in the background. That's the SDKFZ 251, the most photographed German vehicle of the war that nobody can name. Hanomag built it with one job: carry a squad of Panzer Grenadiers directly into battle alongside the tanks. Before this thing existed, infantry had to run behind armored columns and hope for the best. Over 15,000 were built, and they became the backbone of every mechanized division Germany fielded. But here's where it gets fun. There were at least 23 official variants. 23. They strapped mortars on it, anti-aircraft guns, flamethrowers, rocket launchers. They even made ambulance versions, which is a nice thought until you remember it was open-topped. Despite looking like a proper armored vehicle, the 251 had no roof. Troops inside were completely exposed to artillery airbursts, mortar fragments, and anything falling from above. It's basically a metal bathtub on tracks. Still, it became the symbol of blitzkrieg infantry, the Swiss Army knife of the Wehrmacht, if your Swiss Army knife could also launch rockets. But speaking of vehicles carrying things they probably shouldn't have, let's talk about something with even more firepower bolted onto a questionable frame. Kübelwagen. After spending this entire video talking about 70-ton steel nightmares with 88mm cannons, let me introduce you to a car that weighs less than a grand piano. The Kübelwagen was designed by Ferdinand Porsche, built by Volkswagen, and based on the Beetle chassis. That's not a joke. Germany literally sent a Beetle to war. Around 50,000 of these were produced, making it the German answer to the American Jeep. It had an air-cooled flat-4 engine producing a whopping 25 horsepower, which is less than most riding lawnmowers today. But here's the thing, that tiny, underpowered little bug was genuinely brilliant in the field. It weighed roughly 715 kilograms. That's so light it could handle sand and mud surprisingly well, where heavier vehicles just sank straight through. The air-cooled engine meant no radiator, which meant nothing to puncture in combat and nothing to freeze in Russia. It worked in the Sahara. It worked on the Eastern Front. It worked everywhere because there was almost nothing on it that could break. Simple, cheap, reliable, and easy to fix. The complete philosophical opposite of every single tank we've talked about so far. Germany really said, let's build the most over-engineered tanks in history and a weaponized Beetle, and saw zero contradiction. But if you think a Beetle going to war is strange, wait until you see what Germany did with motorcycles. Opel Blitz. Here's the unsexy truth about World War II that nobody wants to put on a poster. Logistics wins wars, not wonder weapons, not blitzkrieg tactics. Trucks win wars, and Germany never had enough of them. The Opel Blitz was the Wehrmacht's standard medium truck. 3 tons of cargo capacity, a 3.6-liter inline-6 gasoline engine, and a design so reliable it became the logistical backbone of every front Germany fought on. Over 100,000 were produced across the war. Sounds like a lot, right? It wasn't even close to enough. Here's the thing that shatters the myth of the hypermodern German war machine. The Wehrmacht still relied heavily on horses for transport, actual horses, pulling actual carts in the 1940s. Germany never achieved full motorization, and the Blitz, good as it was, couldn't close that gap. They simply couldn't build enough of them fast enough, and because that engine ran on gasoline, every Blitz on the road was drinking from a fuel supply already running critically low. So the truck designed to solve Germany's logistics problem was simultaneously making their fuel problem worse, which is, not ideal. But if the Blitz represents Germany's struggle to keep its army moving on the ground, wait until you see what they were trying to do in the water. BF 109. Time to leave the ground. The BF 109 is the Panzer IV of the sky. Not the flashiest, not the most feared, but the one that was actually there for the entire war. From the Spanish Civil War in 1936 all the way to 1945, this thing just kept showing up. Over 34,000 Bf-109s were built, making it the most produced fighter aircraft in history. not the most produced German fighter. The most produced fighter, period. It was armed with machine guns and a 20mm cannon that fired through the propeller hub, which sounds like a terrible idea until you realize it gave pilots a centerline weapon with zero convergence issues. Point and shoot. Erich Hartmann scored all 352 of his aerial kills in a Bf-109. That's the highest individual kill count in aviation history, and it's not particularly close in one type of plane. I don't know what to tell you, but here's the thing. By late war, increasingly powerful engines got bolted onto what was still a 1930s airframe. The handling suffered. The already narrow landing gear became a death trap for new pilots, and the whole plane started feeling like a sports car engine crammed into a bicycle frame. Still, you can't argue with 34,000 airframes and a 9-year combat record. But if you think one legendary fighter covers the Luftwaffe's story, wait until you meet its partner that did everything the 109 couldn't. FW-190. When the FW-190 showed up over France in September 1941, the RAF had a genuine what the hell is that moment. Their Spitfire 5 was supposed to be the best thing in the sky. Then, this blunt-nosed German fighter appeared and outperformed it in virtually every category. Speed, roll rate, climb rate, dive speed. The only thing the Spitfire 5 could do better was turn, which is, not ideal when the other guy is faster than you in every other way. The key difference was the engine. Designer Kurt Tank went with a BMW 801 radial instead of a liquid-cooled inline. That fat, air-cooled radial gave the 190 its stubby nose, but it also made the plane significantly tougher. Liquid-cooled engines have a coolant system. One bullet punctures a coolant line, and the engine overheats and dies. A radial has no coolant to puncture. You could put holes in it, and the thing would keep running. That's a massive advantage when people are actively shooting at you. Over 20,000 were built, making it Germany's second most produced fighter behind the 109, and it did basically everything. Air superiority, ground attack, night fighting, even torpedo bombing. One airframe turned into a Swiss Army knife. But if the 190 was versatile and the 109 was prolific, the next aircraft on this list made both of them look like antiques overnight. If you've ever heard a World War II sound effect in a movie or documentary, you've heard this plane. That screaming, wailing howl that sounds like the sky itself is dying. That wasn't the engine. Those were the Jericho trumpets, small wind-driven sirens mounted on the landing gear, designed for one reason only, to make you lose your mind with fear before the bomb even hit. And honestly, it worked. The Stuka was built around one concept: dive straight down and put a bomb exactly where it needs to go. Near vertical dives at angles up to 80 degrees, which for the 1930s was basically witchcraft. During the invasions of Poland and France, this thing operated as flying artillery for advancing panzer columns. Tanks push forward, Stukas flatten whatever's in the way. That was Blitzkrieg. And the Stuka was its soundtrack, but the Stuka needed friendly skies to survive. Over Britain in 1940, RAF fighters tore them apart so badly they got pulled from the campaign entirely. Turns out, a slow dive bomber with fixed landing gear is basically a piñata when Spitfires show up. Still, over 6,000 were produced. Its most famous pilot, Hans Ulrich Rudel, reportedly destroyed over 500 Soviet vehicles and became the most decorated German soldier of the war, which is, a completely normal career. But if the Stuka terrorized the battlefield from above, the next entry did something even more radical. It rewrote what an airplane could be entirely. ME-2I-6-2. The Messerschmitt ME-2I-6-2 was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft, and it was absolutely terrifying. Capable of hitting speeds around 870 kilometers per hour, it was roughly 150 kilometers per hour faster than anything the Allies had in the sky. Nothing could catch it. Nothing could outrun it. It carried 4 30mm Mk-108 cannons packed into the nose, and each shell hit so hard that just a few rounds could rip a heavy bomber apart. On paper, this was the weapon that could have changed everything. But here's the thing, it didn't. Around 1,430 Me-262s were produced, but far fewer actually saw combat. Jet engine production was a nightmare. The engines had a lifespan of roughly 25 hours before needing replacement, thanks to Germany's lack of heat-resistant alloys. Fuel was practically non-existent by late 1944. Allied bombers were flattening the factories building them. And then, just to make things worse, Hitler personally pushed for the Me-262 to be used as a fast bomber instead of a pure fighter interceptor, which is a bit like buying a Greyhound and making it pull a cart. Though the extent that decision actually delayed its fighter deployment is debated by historians, it certainly didn't help matters. By the time it was seeing regular combat as an interceptor, the war was already lost. Too few airframes, too few trained pilots, too little fuel. The most advanced fighter on Earth, grounded by logistics and bad leadership. And honestly, that's the entire German World War II vehicle story in one machine. Brilliant engineering, terrible strategic decisions, and the complete inability to outproduce the Allies. Every early jet fighter program that came after owed something to studying the Me-262. It just never got the chance to prove what it could really do, which is, not ideal. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.